Hi, welcome to this segment here in Advanced Strategies for Behavior Change and FBA. I'm Candace Southall. I'm here to talk to you today about data, reliability of your data collection and measurement, some examples, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to write an objective based on your baseline data. So let's get started. Let's look at this example and determine what type of data collection this teacher might collect. I'm going to read it to you. You can read along. Johnny's a young boy with autism who gets most of his education in an inclusive classroom. He speaks in one and two word utterances and can say book, food, more, hi, and drink. However, his main mode of communication is a picture exchange system. Although Johnny has demonstrated that he really enjoys group activities, he has lately begun biting his fellow students. He seems to pick on Stephen the most. As if this weren't enough, Johnny has begun pinching his teacher during one-on-one instruction. After he engages in one of these behaviors, he yells, "It hurts," and starts laughing. A behavior analyst has conducted a structured interview as part of the functional behavior assessment. The teacher and parents' responses indicate that Johnny's aggressive behaviors are a function of attention. However, the analyst needs to directly assess the behavior. So, what type of data would you collect to get some baseline information on the amount of behavior? Think about it. Scenario 2. Teresa rarely finishes her classwork. How could she? She's up, she's down, she's wandering all around. Her teacher, Miss Lowe, seems always to be asking her to return to her desk and begin working. Teresa almost never has her book or her pencil out. During class transitions, she is the last to be ready. Miss Lowe believes that Teresa's out-of-seat behavior and procrastination are contributing to her poor grades. She needs to assess the situation and determine which of these behaviors is the most problematic. Take a second and think about this one. What type of data would you collect in this scenario? Feel free to pause and figure it out. Scenario 3. Alex has been diagnosed with a learning disability. He reads at 2 levels below his age and grade. Although he is a star athlete, he is not very popular with his classmates. He does not cause much trouble in class, but he rarely finishes his work and turns in homework. He seems to have a capacity to do the work, but he gets by with C grades. Mr. Cashman, Alex's math teacher, spoke to Alex one day about these concerns, to which Alex responded, "I don't need to work hard. In a few years, I'll be set because I'm going to be a pro baseball or basketball player." Mr. Cashman often lets students work together to finish assignments. During math instruction, Alex works with another student for independent seat work. One day, Alex looked at Sports Illustrated for 13 minutes instead of helping on the assignment. When his partner asked him to lend a hand, Alex said, "Man, I don't get this stuff. Just help me out." The student continued working. When Mr. Cashman noticed what was going on, he told Alex to put the magazine away and get working. Alex complied, but 5 minutes later, he got out the magazine again. On another day, Alex fell asleep and had to be woken up by his partner. Alex frequently asked to go to the bathroom each time Mr. Cashman lets him go. Mr. Cashman needs to determine the amount of time that Alex spends on task during class. What kind of data would you collect? Think about it. Let's look back at Johnny. If you remember, Johnny uses pictures mainly for communication, but he has developed some behaviors that include pinching and biting. How would you collect data for that? Duration? Well, duration would not be a good choice because no one would allow him to continue to bite or pinch for as long as he wanted. To collect accurate duration data, you have to allow the student to engage in the behavior while you're timing how long. So event recording would be appropriate for biting or pinching. If it happens so often, or it's too difficult to count one instance because it's constantly happening, then interval recording can be an alternative. So you can also count the marks on someone. If you're trying to block it, you could count how many times the teacher blocks the pinching or the biting. And in terms of the yelling it hurts and laughing, it's possible that duration recording could be used to record how long he is vocalizing and laughing. So that's scenario one. Let's look at scenario two. Teresa was not finishing her classwork, if you remember. She is out of seat and she procrastinates. So how would you collect data on out of seat behavior? Well, of course it would be operationally defined, but in this case, we're just calling it out of seat. Would you count event? The reason why event recording it would be less desirable is because being out of seat can happen for various lengths of time. So if you counted 2 different out of seat opportunities, one was 5 minutes and one was 20 minutes, but they only each counted as one, that doesn't not very good for comparison. So duration would be optimal for counting out of seat, but if that is too cumbersome, then doing an interval recording could give you a good estimate of the duration of her out of seat. Now, in terms of procrastination, that's really a latency issue. So latency recording, how long does it take for her to start a task from when the directions are given? That's called latency. It's similar to duration, but it's called latency if it is how long it takes to respond to a prompt or a stimulus. Okay, and let's talk about scenario 3. If you remember, Alex was not participating in group assignments and he was going to the restroom. So how do you record data for this? Well, let's look at what the behaviors are exactly. He is not turning in homework completed. So event recording would work in this case. It's not a duration issue, and it's not necessarily appropriate to use interval recording, since you can just count how many times he turns in his assignment. However, if we're talking about the being on task during independent seat work or group work, duration recording or interval recording would both be appropriate for determining his time on task during those activities. So there are some suggestions for the scenarios given here. All right, so moving on, let's talk about reliability of measurement. We've already had some instruction here on types of data collection and how to collect that kind of data. We've also had instruction on how to define a behavior so that it can be observed by multiple people. But to show that our definition is comprehensive and observable, and to show that we are accurately recording data, we collect reliability data. And what that means is to determine if the data you're collecting are accurate or a true representation of the data, or if from day to day you're consistently recording data the same way. Inter-observer agreement, having another person come in and collect data alongside you at the same time and then comparing the data, can show you if there's any disagreement or agreement, which can give you the level of confidence you have in reporting your findings. So how do we do this? Well, we have to think about the type of data we have collected. Different types of data might be permanent product, like a spelling test score. Or we might have frequency data or event data. So we have just tallied how often something happens. Or we have duration or latency, where we have timed a certain type of behavior or lack of response to a stimulus. And then, of course, interval agreement is when we have sectioned out the time, our data collection time, into smaller intervals, and we're looking for the behavior to occur at the end of the interval for doing the momentary time sample interval. Okay, so there are other types of interval recording, which would be partial interval. If it just happened anytime in the interval, it would be marked as an occurrence. Or whole interval, if it happened the entire interval, that would be when it was marked as an occurrence. So there are different types of interval recording. We've talked about the momentary time sampling more specifically, but there are the other two. So once we've determined which type of data we've collected, we'll know which type of reliability data we need to collect and report. So if you have event recording, duration recording, permanent product recording, you're going to just use what they call the gross method. And that means that you take the two sum data from each person, and you divide the smaller number by the larger number. So if the observer 1 said it happened 5 times and observer 2 said it happened 10 times, you take 5 divided by 10 and multiply that by 100, 50%. That is your agreement. Let's look at this data here. Let's pretend that it's not interval recording, that we have observer 1 and observer 2. So observer 1 saw the behavior occur 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Observer 2 saw the behavior occur 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So if this were just event data, event recording, you would take 6 divided by 7. So 6 divided by 7 is about 86%. So in that case, your inter-observer agreement would be 86%. However, if this were interval recording, doing the gross method would kind of skew your data, because did these two observers really agree 86% of the time? So if knowing that this is interval recording, let's see how many times they agreed on data. So interval 1, did they agree? Yes. Interval 2, did they agree? No. 3, yes. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. No. No. Yes. And yes. So they agreed 7 times out of the 12. What is that? Hey Siri, what's 7 divided by 12?
7 divided by 12 is about 0.5833.
Okay, so if we take that and multiply it by 100, we have 58% agreement. Okay, so if you have interval recording, you need to collect your inter-observer agreement by calculating the number of intervals that you and this other observer agreed, and then dividing that by the total number of intervals that were in the session, the data collection session. Try this one on your own. I'll put it as a quick activity for you to submit your answers. For the gross method part, pretend like it's not interval recording and see what is the smaller number of occurrences over the larger number of occurrences times 100. For point by point, remember, you look at each interval and decide if it's agreed, or not agreed, not agreed, agreed. You find out the number of agreements and you divide by 20, right? And I'll have you post that after the video. All right, so we've done it. Now, what are the standards? What's acceptable? Is 58 acceptable? Is 86 acceptable? Well, here you have your range. 80% to 100% inter-observer agreement is acceptable. If you don't get this, it's not the end of the world. It just means that you might have some problems. What do you need to check for? This is an opportunity for you to clear up your targeted behavior definition. Perhaps it's not defined as observably and measurably as you thought. You have to think about observer drift. Over time, you as the observer or someone might tend to have a bias for the student's behavior. You might think it's getting, you might be more strict about it now that you notice it more, or over time you might just be so used to it you might just get lazy in data collection, okay? Okay there, so before we go, let's take a look at a graph. I want to show you the parts of a graph. The next video in this series is instructions on how to graph using Excel. Perhaps you know other ways to graph, or perhaps you're just going to graph by hand. But I wanted to show you the important parts and features and explain why they're important. So let's take a look. Here we have the origin. That's where the two axes meet. The ordinate scale is the y-axis. That's generally what we call our dependent measure. It's what we've been collecting data on. Okay, so it's the behavior that's going to change over time, which brings us to the abscissa scale. The x-axis is really a time series. Sometimes it's labeled sessions, sometimes days. Now this solid line here is going between two completely different conditions. Baseline condition is the data collected that are treatment as usual, no intervention. And then we have a DRO, or differential reinforcement of other behaviors procedure here. So we put a condition change line to show that something different happened in this condition. Now this is also a change line, but technically a dashed line is a phase change line, and a phase change is when an intervention is just adapted. Generally, we try to thin out reinforcement or fade prompts, fade the intervention. So in this case, the DRO is no longer teacher driven, but the student is timing and self-reinforcing if the student goes a certain amount of time without engaging in the talk outs. Let's look. Data path break has to occur between conditions. So we never connect data points across conditions because different things are happening between them. A scale break is when there's an extended period of time with no data collection. Spring break, Christmas break, virus outbreak, and school gets canceled, whatever. That's why that data break, scale break is there. These are called data points. This is a data path. And we want to also make sure we're identifying our ordinate value. That's our dependent variable. And our time series. Could be days and sessions, like I said before. And also we have our conditions labeled with what was happening in each condition. Okay, so I also want to end with the format for writing objectives. You're going to have to write an objective based on your baseline data for both your desired behavior and your interfering behavior. Start with looking at your desired behavior. That's what you want to increase. So you write your objective, first giving the conditions, then saying the student's name and describing the behavior, and then the criterion for mastery. Let's take a look at an example. Here we have this one. It says, during a one-on-one instruction, that's the condition, J will participate, J is the student, in behavior. Participate in an activity with an adult for a minimum of 10 minutes by staying in the area, engaging in the activity, and interacting with other persons without exhibiting challenging, hitting, kicking, walking around the room during instruction, will not engage in teacher-directed tasks, or attempting to elope from the area for 5 consecutive days as measured by duration recording. So our criterion is 10 minutes for 5 consecutive days. So obviously duration recording was taken 3 days at least of baseline data, and that yielded that the student's doing this 10-minute duration or more. Okay, so that is an objective for increasing desired behavior. Now we want to decrease the interfering behaviors. Here are a couple of examples. During one-on-one instruction, J decreases challenging behavior, which is defined as kicking, hitting, walking around the room during instruction while not engaging in teacher-directed tasks, from 5 out of 10 minutes to 0 out of 10 minutes for 5 consecutive days as measured by event recording. So event recording yielded a rate of 5 out of 10 minutes occurrence, but we want to get it down to 0. That's the criterion. Another example, during one-on-one instruction, J will decrease attempting to elope from the area from 2 times per 10 minutes to 0 times per 10 minutes for 5 consecutive days as measured by event recording. So there you have the formula for writing an objective. Once you have your baseline data, you can think about that and write those objectives, and that's what you're going to base your plan on. Okay? Remember, you're just collecting baseline data, and you do not have to put the intervention in place. You'll hypothesize later, you'll hypothesize intervention data, what you would like to see, but that's really the end of the actual in the classroom field experience. Have a great day. Bye. So we have to be reminded, that's why we